And yes, I do believe, to the member's question, that is a legitimate matter. And I ask other Liberal members to have the courage of the former Attorney General. You know, in the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb-driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife.
This is question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a pay-to-play problem. It's because the Prime Minister has expensive taste and powerful friends. First, it was vacation on Billionaire Island. Then it was the special legal deal for SNC-Lavalin. Then it was speaking fees and taxpayer dollars for we. Now it's Liberal donations for judicial appointments. Mr. Speaker, we now know that the Prime Minister's top Liberal Alberta advisor has more say on who becomes a judge than the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, how many more well-connected Liberals is the Prime Minister going to make taxpayers pay for?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we reformed the judicial appointments process, making it merit-based, creating independent committees to make recommendations on judicial appointments. We will continue to look for the absolute best jurists across the country to step up, continue to appoint people that reflect the great diversity of this country, so we have a bench that looks much more like Canada. We will continue to appoint the highest qualified jurists on a merit-based approach that we reformed after the Conservatives made it political.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, our justice system must be impartial, yet this government is picking judges based on ideological requirements and partisan ones. They have one way of doing things for Liberal candidates, another way for other people. A political staffer of the Minister of Justice sounded the alarm, but he was silenced. How many other Liberal employees are afraid of saying the truth? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, after all the Conservative partisanship in 2016, we reformed our system of judicial appointments. It's now based on merit. We work with an independent committee. In order to make a selection and recommendations, we will always choose the best individuals to sit on the bench. And we will continue to have and work for a justice system that reflects our whole country. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Almost 20% of the judicial appointments in Newfoundland and Labrador are vacant. Now we know it's probably because the Liberals are having trouble finding donors in that province. The last appointment was made in March of 2019. Mr. Speaker, there's no shortage of great lawyers in Newfoundland and Labrador, and leaving this many seats open is creating real access to justice problems for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister holding up justice in Newfoundland and Labrador because he's still looking for his favourite Liberal donors?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, after years of neglecting Newfoundland and Labrador, after years of Conservative government that couldn't quite get it right on nominations to the Supreme Court, we are proud to nominate the very first Newfoundlander and Labradorian to the Supreme Court of Canada. Our appointments to the bench are made on a merit-based process, and we draw from a broad panel of experts in order to get the right people to the bench across the country. We will continue to do so, and we'll take no lessons from the Conservatives on the way they did partisan appointments, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, if the We Charity scandal has showed us anything, it's that there is one line for this government, a line for Liberal friends, and another one for other Canadians. The scandals of this government have broken the trust that Canadians have in it. When will the Prime Minister stop governing for his friends and start governing for all Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have focused on giving aid to Canadians. Yesterday, we had 2,400 more new COVID cases. We will continue to focus on assistance to families, businesses, workers and grandparents, we will continue to focus on Canadians and delivering for Canadians. We will continue to make the Parliament work because it is time to deliver for Canadians and not a time to follow the Conservatives into an election. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Canadians have a trust problem with this Prime Minister. It's because he keeps looking after people who need his help the least. Now Canadians want to know, what powerful friend is he protecting now? Whose name is beneath all the black ink on the WE documents? Who did he prorogue Parliament for? Who was promoting schemes that cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars? Who was he protecting when he instructed his Liberal MPs to filibuster for hours at committee? Who and what are the Prime Minister covering up with these latest threats of an election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with what the Leader of the Opposition said this morning, with the motion he put forward in his own name, and even with the question he's asking, he is demonstrating clearly that he has lost confidence in the government's ability to manage this pandemic. The question he has put before the House, which will be voted on tomorrow, is whether or not Parliament has lost the confidence of, the government has lost the confidence of Parliament. We believe that we need to continue to work together in Parliament to deliver, which is why we're proposing a special committee to look into government spending, why we will continue to focus on Canadians while Conservatives focus on politics.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, stress and suspense is unbearable. Will we be going into an election? That's the big question. But the government itself says that it's a vote of confidence. So I would challenge you, either there's a problem or they think that it won't happen. But they don't want it to be its fault. But let's stop playing games. Do you or do you not want to go to an election? I ask the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have other things to do here in the House. So we have to work on a daily basis to deliver for Canadians, for small businesses that are suffering because of COVID-19, for seniors who are concerned and living in the long-term care homes, for Canadians across the country who are worried about the healthcare system and the health crisis, as well as the future of their children. That is why we on this side of the House, we are working hard to deliver for Canadians, and we will continue to do so in the hopes that the opposition parties will continue to work in order to make this Parliament, this minority Parliament, work. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. It's more beautiful than credible. So if you don't want a bicycle, don't buy a bicycle, especially if you don't want to pedal. The Prime Minister doesn't want to go into an election. Can he tell his neighbour on the left that it's not a confidence motion? We're going to have a committee and that we're going to look into the We Charity issue because proroguing the Parliament in order to try to avoid that has happened. And we're going to do our job instead. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for months, the Bloc has been talking about an election, not us. We are focusing on the work that we need to do for Canadians. We will continue to deliver on a daily basis through the subsidy for businesses, through assistance, through the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which has been transformed into EI. We will focus on Canadians, and we hope that the opposition parties will continue to work with us to deliver for Canadians. But it's a choice. It's their choice to go into election or not. The Honourable Member for Rosemont Petite Patrie. The Liberals are trying to hide behind the opposition in justifying a call of an election in the midst of a health crisis. Instead of getting to the bottom of their WE scandal and their WE friends, they prefer instead to take people hostage and abusing democratic institutions. It's irresponsible. Let's be clear. If the Prime Minister wants to call an election, he can go and visit the Governor General. Otherwise, he can work with the opposition, put in place a committee in order to find answers for the people. People deserve the truth. What are the Liberals afraid of? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we proposed a special committee that will be able to look at the expenses, the expenditures by government. We're very happy to continue working in Parliament because during this crisis, we are working for Canadians. There were 2,400 new COVID cases announced yesterday, 22,000 active cases throughout the country. We will continue to focus on this health crisis and the economic crisis. We will be there to protect Canadians and deliver for them. We hope the opposition will do the same.
For Timmins, James Bay.
We are in the worst medical and economic catastrophe in a century, and yet this Prime Minister has stated his willingness to plunge the nation into a pandemic election all over the procedural wrangling of a committee. Seriously. Now, this is the same Prime Minister who prorogued Parliament and monkey-wrenched the work of our committees. So, if he wants to take advantage of the pandemic, he can go to the Governor-General anytime. He doesn't need to hide behind the opposition. Or he can show some maturity and let Parliament do the work that we are here for. So what's it going to be? Is he going to be keep the cover-up, or is he going to let Parliament do the work, or is he just going to go to the Governor-General?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we want Parliament to work, which is why we've proposed a special committee to look into government spending in the exceptional circumstances of this pandemic. But the Conservative opposition put forward a motion that very clearly outlines the fact that the Leader of the Opposition himself admitted earlier today that he does not have confidence in this government to manage the pandemic. And now the opposition parties have a choice. Do they want to make Parliament work and work for Canadians, or do they want to vote non-confidence and trigger election? The choice, Mr. Speaker, is theirs. On this side of the House, we're going to keep working for Canadians.
Right Honourable Member, or the Honourable Member for Portage-Lister.
Mr. Speaker, there's a troubling pattern with this Prime Minister when he's backed into a corner or doesn't get his way. He elbows, he bullies, he fires, and he threatens. And he's doing that again right now as his cozy relationship with we is being exposed. He's threatening to plunge Canadians into an election during a pandemic. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's been said that those with nothing to hide, hide nothing. So when will the Prime Minister stop the threats, stop hiding, and come clean with Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we propose the creation of this committee where all members can ask questions, an important committee for important work. What the Conservatives are doing is to try to jam the government, right? Is to try to focus on the other parties. This is an ultra-partisan, it's an ultra-partisan move, Mr. Speaker, that serves nothing for Canadians. It just serves their own interest. It's irresponsible, and they should be ashamed of that.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lister.
Well, these Liberals should be ashamed of themselves. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Kids can't go out for Halloween. People can't visit their dying loved ones. Restaurants and small businesses are being shut down. But the Prime Minister must have his way, and if he doesn't, he's going to force everyone into an election. These are not the actions of an honourable leader, Mr. Speaker. These are the actions of a self-serving emperor with no clothes. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister stop the cover-up, stop holding Parliament hostage, back off from his threats of an election if this motion passes? Show some leadership.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're working hard for Canadians on health issues, on economic issues. We're asking a collaboration for all members of the House. And the best thing they find to do is to come up with this ultra-irresponsible motion, Mr. Speaker. They got together, they thought they put their best brains together, and they say, hey, this is the best way we're going to help Canadians. Let's jam the government, Mr. Speaker, and that's unacceptable.
I just want to remind the honourable members that there are folks who are participating hybrid, and we want to make sure that they hear everything. So we want to keep the sounds down. I know there's a little bit of chatter, and that's part of it, but some of you have wonderful voices, and they're very strong, and they do carry quite well, and we don't want them drowning out the person who's speaking. The honourable member for Carleton.
So they've got absolutely nothing to hide, and they're willing to bring themselves down to hide it. That is effectively the position of this government. They are prepared to defeat themselves in order to stop anyone from asking them questions about the Prime Minister's gift of $500 million to a group that had given his family $500,000. We want to put all of this in one committee so the rest of Parliament can work for Canadians' lives and livelihoods across the House of Commons. What have they got to hide.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we're proposing the creation of this committee with members from all parties that can ask all the important questions, do the important work. You put that in contrast with what the Conservatives are doing at this moment, when people are suffering, people are looking for their jobs, people are worried for their loved one. The best idea, with all their brains around the table, that they come up to is that motion that wants to paralyze the government, Mr. Speaker, and that is totally unacceptable.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, let's talk about all of the brains around that table over there. They said, we tried to cover it up by shutting down Parliament. But then Parliament came back. And so we tried to cover it up by giving 20 hours of speeches. But then we ran out of things to say. So can any of the smart brains around the table come up with a better idea to cover it up? I know, let's call an election. That's the best that they can come up with. We've got millions unemployed. We have lives at risk. We should be working for Canadians. Why are they trying to upturn all of that important work to cover up their scandal?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my colleague across the aisle wants to give the impression he's an expert on everything. Let me quote him something here. The decision on what to reveal is made by non-partisan public servants for whom it has long been a tradition not to reveal cabinet confidences. That has been the case going back to all previous governments of all party stripes, Mr. Speaker. And who said that? The member of Carleton.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the federal Liberal carnival will never change. Mandate after mandate, it's always the same song. No respect for public funds, for Canadian taxpayers' money. During the middle of a pandemic, they took advantage to line their pockets of the We Charity. It failed ethically, but also in terms of official languages by offering the management of the program to a unilingual Anglophone company. Why did the Prime Minister use We Charity at the expense of French? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Why is the opposition giving priority to a partisan, irresponsible motion instead of working with the government on the health of Canadians, on the health of our seniors, on the health of our businesses, Mr. Speaker? Why did the opposition to play partisan politics in an unacceptable way instead of working with us? It's holding its hand out. It's still holding its hand. Our hand is still held out. Let's work together instead of partisan politics. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, what I understand is that the Prime Minister was going to give money quickly, but not so quick when it came time to helping the aeronautics industry in Quebec, the green aluminum plants, shipping strategy. The Liberals were quick to help their friends and no one else. How can the Prime Minister, who's from Quebec, deliberately ignore the Francophones in Quebec and across the country? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, our government stands up on a daily basis for Francophones. We stand up every day for Quebec and Quebec industries, for our seniors, for the healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, on a daily basis, we defend Quebecers and Quebec. We will be there for them, be it in a pandemic or any other time. When the Conservatives have to make the good choice for Quebec, all they do is come up with a partisan committee. The Honourable Member for Beloeil-Chambly. If the Liberals stand up for Quebec as they stand up for Davy, we're in trouble. The Bloc Québécois voted against the throne speech because the Bloc Québécois did not accept that we would attack Quebec healthcare system. We were prepared to go to an election for that reason. The reason that the Liberals want to go to an election is to hide their scandal. The Prime Minister will be the proverbial needle in a haystack. I believe I understand that the NDP is hearing reason, and I presume that the Conservatives will vote for their own motion. Is the Prime Minister losing his bluff because he wants to hide behind this serious ethics violation? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the confidence vote, the Bloc lacks credibility here. For a month, they've said that they would vote against the government. leader of the bloc said, we'll go to an election, And now they say that we're not responsible because we're talking about confidence in the House. The system is working here, Mr. Speaker. If they have confidence, they should say it, and if they don't, they should say that. The honourable member for Beloeil-Chambly. I don't have confidence in this government, Mr. Speaker. And I don't imagine that they can say that. No one buys that argument. The government is trying to either force an election or to hide its ethics issues. But the same leader is going to stand up and say, you're right, life goes on, and let's go back to our work. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, there is not anybody who is unemployed who wants to go and vote in an election. The Bloc is being irresponsible. It's joining the Conservatives in order to try to force the fall of the government. They should take responsibility for their choices and the consequences of those choices. They should have the courage to do that.
Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, for over 15 hours, Liberals at the Ethics Committee have filibustered and blocked the production of documents. They've read the newspaper. They've given us a philosophy lesson. They've read letters. It's all been a little much. All of this is a desperate attempt to cover up corruption and hide these documents from Canadians. Whatever happened to sunlight and being open by default? When will the filibuster and the Liberal cover-up end?
The Honourable House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in case I read too fast earlier, I'm going to read again what I read before to my colleague. The decision on what to reveal is made by non-partisan public servants for whom it has long been a tradition not to reveal cabinet confidences. That has been the case going back to all previous governments of all party stripes. Now, do my colleague there agree with his colleague over there?
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
So, Mr. Speaker, well, there we have it. There's going to be no end to the filibuster. They're not going to end their cover-up. They'll stop at nothing to prevent these documents from coming to light. Even in the middle of a pandemic, they want to plunge Canadians into an election. So the question is very simple. What are you so desperate to hide?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, I guess they'll stop at nothing to provoke an election, Mr. Speaker. Right. On this side of the House, we suggested the creation of a special committee, a very important committee to do important job that would allow all parties to ask important questions, call witnesses, do everything that is required from the opposition, Mr. Speaker. That is our proposal. Why are they saying no? Why do they have to have this ultra-partisan responsible committee to jam the government? Why is it so important for them, Mr. Speaker?
I just want to remind the honourable members it's one question at a time. I know there's a lot of questions that you want to ask, but we can only ask one question at a time, not while somebody's answering, or while as somebody's asking a question, it makes it that much more difficult.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, why we want this committee is because Canadians are entitled to the truth. That's why we want to create the committee. When the Liberals are in trouble, what do? They prorogued Parliament. And now they're in trouble. What are they doing? They are threatening to call an election if we don't agree. We're always on the side of truth. Why is the government refusing to table all the relevant documents related to the We Charity issue? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, they always vote on the side of the truth when the truth suits them, and they will decide what the truth is, and if they like it, if so, good, if not, great. But we propose the creation of a committee that will do very important work. It will allow us to ask questions, allow the government to improve the programs, Mr. Speaker. It's very responsible, and I invite all members to support this so that we can do the work necessary because we want to work for Canadians, for children, families, seniors, students, businesses, and we will continue to do that job, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in listening to CBC this morning, I remembered my years in the National Assembly in the Basse-Terrasse Commission when we learned, back at the time of the Basse-Terrasse days, that the provincial Liberal government had a system of post-its where they identified which Liberal friends could become judges. Liberals are always going to be Liberals, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Justice. Can the Minister of Justice give us the assurance here in the House that any Liberal friends, were any Liberal friends consulted about the appointment of judges, the Honourable Minister of Justice? Mr. Speaker, our government has put in place a very important measure to ensure that the appointment process reflects the quality and diversity of Canada. I want to be clear. I have never been subject to any pressure to appoint any judge The decision to make the recommendation to Cabinet is mine alone.
Yesterday, we put forward a simple motion. We asked the House to affirm the treaty and inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people that were affirmed treaties, confirmed in the Canadian Constitution and upheld in the Supreme Court. But the Liberals voted no. They also refused to acknowledge the Mi'kmaq deserve full and equal protection by the law from violence and intimidation. They voted no to recognizing their failure to respect nation-to-nation relationships, to accommodate the moderate livelihood fishery that has led to the crisis that we're facing today. My question is simple. Why?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite what the NDP say, our government is having nation-to-nation conversations with First Nations. That's imperative because we have always said the Mi'kmaq have an affirmed treaty right to fish in pursuit of a moderate livelihood under the Marshall Decision. And when it comes to safety, everyone in Canada deserves to be protected, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're standing up, making sure that the resources are there that the province of Nova Scotia needs for the RCMP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Mr. Speaker, today's serious alarm bells are being raised about Liberal partisanship in the Prime Minister's office. The Liberals are treating judicial appointments like a basket of party favours for well-connected partisan friends. This smacks of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, where the PMO pressured the former Attorney General, interfering with her office's criminal prosecution of that Liberal-friendly corporation. Partisan appointments can open the door for Liberals to lean on judges in inappropriate ways we can only imagine. Have they learned nothing from the SNC, Aga Khan, and We scandal? When will the Prime Minister learn that partisan appointments have no place in our judicial system?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the honourable member that we put in a process for appointing judges which removes the partisanship that we saw with the previous government. Mr. Speaker, we have a judicial appointment committee. We have judicial appointment committees in place across Canada. Those committees work hard to vet the candidacies without any recourse to partisan political matters. Mr. Speaker, I take those recommendations, highly recommended or recommended. We do further consultations, and Mr. Speaker, there is no partisanship in the names that I recommend to Cabinet.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand today in recognition and support for our doctors. They guide us in preventing future illnesses and injuries and heal us when we're sick or injured. And as medical professionals, they warn us about the dangers to our lives. One issue they continue to warn about is gun violence across Canada, but not everyone is listening. Conservatives have aligned themselves with a gun lobby who has plagiarized the Americans' NRA motto of stay in your lane and bully doctors who speak about the victims they have to treat and the family members they have had to inform who have lost a loved one. Can the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness please inform this House what steps our government is taking to address gun violence? Thank you.
Mr. Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the member from Cape Breton-Canso for his very important question. And today I want to join him in remembering the lives of those who have been impacted by gun violence. Mr. Speaker, since forming government, we've taken action by passing legislation that enhances background checks and helps law enforcement through better data collection. We've also delivered on our promise to prohibit tactical assault weapons that, Mr. Speaker, have no place in our society. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to strengthen gun control by stopping guns at our border, by preventing theft and criminal diversion, and through the introduction of red flag laws. Mr. Speaker, we don't work for the gun lobby, we work for Canadians, and we'll work relentlessly to keep them safe.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
COVID bureaucracy kept dying Winnipeg man and his brother apart. I'm tired of these headlines. It's been 9 months into the COVID scandal and crisis, and the Liberals only use shutdown and a 14-day quarantine that nobody can afford as ways to address the pandemic. But countries around the world have started to use rapid testing for pre- and post-arrival testing as well as a way to reunite families, but not Canada. I want to review this failure and come up with a better path forward. We need to do that. That should be a non-partisan issue, but the Liberals are blocking the Health Committee. They're blocking everybody from being able to do this. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in science and evidence as a way to manage our way through COVID-19 and the astronomical challenges it presents to Canadians from coast to coast. Mr. Speaker, we'll always put the health and safety of Canadians first and foremost in everything that we do. That's why we take so seriously our responsibility to control the importation of COVID-19 at the borders. Mr. Speaker, we're working with partners, provinces, territories, researchers to understand ways that we can manage the border effectively with the primary goal, Mr. Speaker, of protecting the health and safety of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
You know what would be a great way to review science and evidence? The Health Committee. Yet the Liberals are blocking the review of this issue at every turn. It's been 10 days since we introduced a motion on this, and they keep filibustering it. Right now, there are thousands of airline workers who know that a bailout isn't going to save their jobs. They're seeing countries around the world implement pre- and post-arrival rapid testing as a way to keep these jobs sustained and keep people safe. But yet we can't review it at Health Committee because they're blocking this. It's like this government just doesn't want Parliament to be able to do its job. It's so arrogant. It's so frustrating. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I will remind the member opposite that health committees are free to study issues that they choose. But on this side of the House, I'll tell you, as the government, we have an important role to make sure that we use science and evidence in our decision-making on how we manage COVID-19, including at the borders. And I want to thank my colleagues, particularly the provincial and territorial colleagues, who worked so diligently with us to understand the important role that quarantine plays in our current response to reducing importations of COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we'll always rely on science and evidence to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the CRA sent a letter to hundreds of Canadians to warn them that there may be an issue with their bank account number and there is a risk of fraud. Many people said that they called the number and they received no answer. We have a direct number to call as members, but even we don't get an answer. Can the government tell us what's going on? The Honourable